Welcome to the first lecture of this course. This week, we'll discuss how to write a research paper. You will learn how to choose a strong topic, how to formulate a thesis, and how to organize your paper. You will also learn how to choose sources to use for your research, how to document work in your research paper, and how to create a bibliography. As you can see, we have a lot to cover. Are you ready to get started? Here we go. Let's begin by talking about the paper you'll be writing in this course. In your final week of this course, you'll be required to submit a 3 to 5 page research paper on a topic of your choice. That's right, you get to choose your own paper topic. You'll have to make sure you pick a topic that can be researched, and you'll have to make sure your topic is not too broad or too narrow. For example, the topic HIV would be way too broad for a research paper. But the topic HIV rates among American youth in the Deep South in the 2000s is narrow enough to write about. So start considering what you might want to write about. Research papers are exciting because you learn a lot in the process of writing them, and you get the chance to teach people about something they don't already know. Before you decide on your topic, take some time to mull it over. Try a Google search to see if there's a good amount of information out there on a topic you're interested in. Because ultimately, you'll need to be sure that you'll have enough to say about a topic for 3 to 5 pages. Also, pick a topic that interests you. You're going to have to spend a while researching and writing about it, so it only makes sense for you to pick a topic that doesn't bore you. Once you have selected the topic of your paper, it's time to start researching. You should use a number of sources for your research paper, including books, periodicals, and online sources. Periodicals include newspapers, magazines, and journals, and you can access some of these online. For example, the New York Times, Chicago Sun-Tribune, and Los Angeles Times are all online. You can search the archives for these sites to find articles that were written years ago. Often, you have to create a free account to access news articles online, but it takes you just a few minutes, and then you're free to research all you want. Other times, you might stumble across a site that will require you to pay to look through the archives. In this case, write down the name of the article you want to read and try looking for it in your local library, where you can read it for free. Once you've picked your topic and have begun to research, it's time to make sure you have a clear focus for your paper. This means it's time to pick your thesis and organize the body of your paper. Let's take a closer look at how to do this. Just like you don't want your paper topic to be overly broad or narrow, you don't want your thesis to be too broad or too narrow either. Your thesis must be specific enough so that you aren't overwhelmed by the amount of information to research, yet broad enough so that you don't run out of things to say after the first paragraph. The key to a strong paper is a solid thesis, so you'll want to make sure you choose a good one. Remember that we spoke about the creation of thesis statements in the prerequisite to this course. If you don't remember that information solidly, reread the chapter about creating thesis statements in your textbook. This chapter is helpful and also includes some exercises to get you thinking about the formulation of successful thesis statements. Let's say that I'm writing a research paper about alternative sources of energy. My thesis might be something like, in order for the United States to decrease its dependence on foreign oil, more federal funds must be allocated towards developing environmentally friendly energy practices and encouraging the American people to utilize these practices. Do you see how this thesis is specific? If I had just picked alternative energy for my paper topic, I would have way too much information to work with for a short paper. Instead, I picked a thesis that is about alternative energy, but zeroes in on something specific, that the U.S. should invest more money into programs that will continue to develop alternative energy practices and will encourage people to participate in these practices. After you write your thesis, you need to plan how you will organize your information. Your textbook recommends you create an outline that looks like this. First, you want to state your thesis. Then, following that thesis, you should list three large areas of support that will help you back up or prove your thesis. So my outline might look like this. Thesis: in order for the United States to decrease its dependence on foreign oil, more federal funds must be allocated towards developing environmentally friendly energy practices and encouraging the American people to utilize these practices. Support. 1. U.S. dependence on foreign oil affects the way other nations perceive the U.S. 2. Positive benefits of alternative energy include environmental and social. 3. Federal funds can promote development of alternative energy and convince people to be more eco-friendly. Tax incentives can be available for people who buy environmentally friendly products like hybrid cars. Tax incentives can be available for businesses that use alternative methods for energy. Do you see how I jotted down my ideas for each paragraph? I now have a pretty clear idea of the direction my paper is headed, just by taking a few minutes to write down my thoughts. Once you have your topic, thesis, and purpose of your paper figured out, take a deep breath and pat yourself on the back. You've already taken significant steps toward completing your research paper. The next thing you'll have to do is gather information for your paper. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and get cozy in the library. This is where the research part of your paper begins. To start, I recommend heading to a library with a notebook, highlighter, pencil, and a ton of energy. You'll likely want to begin with a subject search of your topic. You've already learned about the ways to look for books according to subject, title, and author, so now's your chance to utilize those skills. For example, if I were to do a subject search for my paper about alternative energy, I might type alternative energy, foreign oil, or sustainable resources into the library catalog. This way, I would see a list of books relating to my subject, and then I could go find those books in the library. You should also check out the periodicals section of the library to find relevant news articles and journal pieces about your topic. I recommend searching for periodicals online before you do anything else, just as a way to narrow down your information and find your sources as quickly as possible. Google.com offers a helpful feature that lets you locate news articles. Just go to the search bar and type in your subject. In my case, I would search for alternative energy. Then look at the tabs above the search bar. There are tabs titled Images, News, Shopping, Gmail, and more. After typing your subject in the search box, click on the tab titled News, and a list of news articles about alternative energy will pop up. This is a helpful tool that I've used many times. After you've gathered all of your information, it's time to start taking notes. You can choose to write your notes on index cards, loose paper, or on your computer. You can take notes in a number of ways. You can write down direct quotations from your material. You can paraphrase information you find in your material, or you can summarize the information you find. It's a good idea to make sure your notes include the title of the work you're using, whether it's a book, magazine, or news article. You should also neatly label the top of your notes so you understand what your notes are about. It's helpful to take many notes, trust me on this. Sometimes I like to print out or photocopy news articles or journal articles so I can write my own notes on the margins and highlight words or phrases that stand out as particularly important. It's also helpful to take as many notes as possible, even if you end up not using the information at all. The more notes you take, the more the material is being ingrained in your brain. The simple process of reading something and paraphrasing it in your notes can help you better understand the information. Plus, it's better to have more information than you need and weed out what's superfluous than to get into the nitty-gritty of writing and realize you don't have enough information. When you're taking notes, make sure you're taking them the right way. This means that if you're using a direct quotation, meaning you're copying something word for word from another source, you're giving proper credit to the author of the work. If you're using a direct quote but are omitting certain information from the quote, use an ellipses to show that some information is not present. Take a look at the example below. Although I wrote it, let's pretend it was published in a magazine somewhere. I do not understand the obsession America has with SUVs. For the life of me, I can't understand why someone would spend so much money to drive a giant gas hog that may not even be safe. To me, it makes more sense to spend half as much money and get a reliable, safe, compact car. Here's how I would use this information if I were to directly quote it in my paper. I do not understand the obsession America has with SUVs. To me, it makes way more sense to spend half as much money and get a reliable, safe, compact car. Do you see how I used the ellipses to replace the sentence that read, "For the life of me, I can't understand why someone would spend so much money to drive a giant gas hog that may not even be safe"? Interesting, isn't it? Let's go through the note-taking process a bit more thoroughly. When you're reading material for your paper, ask yourself questions like, is this information particularly important? Is this something that would make my paper stronger or more credible? If you answer yes to these questions, include the information in your paper. For example, if I read an article about alternative energy in the New York Times, I'd want to know what information to include from the article and what information to disregard. So after reading the article for the first time, I might stop and think to myself, what was the main point of that article? I would then go back over the article, looking out for the key words or phrases that would provide support for my paper. After going through the article, I determined the main points had to do with using technology to tap into energy sources. Certain key words and statistics in the text jumped out at me, so I decided to include the information in my notes. If I were taking notes on a note card, usually my method of choice, I might write a short summary of the information. I would also include the link to the article, so I could reference it again when writing my bibliography. The United States provides just 6% of hydropower energy and 10% of electric power. As the prices of conventional fuels increase, alternative energy sources will become more popular. New York Times, Beyond Fossil Fuels. Do you see how I summarized the main points of the article? This will allow me to use the information in my paper. Later, when I write my bibliography, I'll go back to the website to get all the correct information. You've already learned about plagiarism and the harsh consequences that go along with it in your last composition course. But it's important to remind you that plagiarism is absolutely not acceptable. It may seem tempting to just find an essay online and use that, or just copy information you find about your topic and pretend it's your own work. But you should be forewarned. The Internet has made it extremely easy for your teacher to type just one suspicious sentence from your paper and immediately have access to the entire document you stole your work from. Also, your teacher knows your writing style. If you're turning in assignments for 4 weeks straight and then submit a research paper that sounds nothing like you, your teacher will notice and will be suspicious. And you will fail and can even be kicked out of school. This makes it sound reasonable to do your own work, doesn't it? In sum, plagiarism is simply not worth it. Not only can it get you into serious trouble, it also takes away from the experience you'll gain from writing a research paper. Reference your textbook to learn more about plagiarism. Each time you write a paper, you are improving your skills and practicing reading and writing, two very important skills to master. So no matter how difficult the paper writing process may be, go about writing your research paper honestly. And if you get stuck, ask your instructor for help. Having said that, a great way to avoid plagiarism altogether is to properly cite your sources as you go along. Remember, anytime you use another person's work, you must cite it in your paper. Now, before you get paranoid, it's important to say that you only have to cite information that is not common knowledge. For example, let's go back to my paper about alternative energy. Well, I already know a few things about alternative energy. I know that it is becoming increasingly important to utilize forms of energy that are not dependent on fossil fuels. I also know that our dependence on foreign oil affects the way other countries perceive the U.S. So if I were to use this information in my paper, I would not have to cite it. However, if I write about information that is not well known, I have to cite it. For example, I might write something like, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, climate change will affect our infrastructure. As ground levels thaw, our roads and buildings will be destroyed. Do you see how I gave credit to the source of the information, but was still able to use the material in my paper? Remember, citing many sources does not look bad. Nobody expects you to be an expert on your subject. In fact, citing multiple sources shows that you have dedication to your research. There are different ways to cite your sources, depending on the type of source you're going to cite. Your textbook provides many helpful examples for citing your work, so pay special attention to them in this week's reading assignment. Make sure you stuck to MLA guidelines for documentation if that's what you were supposed to be following. You'll lose points if you do not cite your information correctly. Make sure you carefully review the MLA guidelines before you begin to cite sources in your paper. There are many specific rules to follow. like when to include a page number or the author's last name. Your textbook provides a lengthy list of rules, so reference it often during your writing, and you'll be fine. Although there are many different ways you can cite your work, right now I'm just going to include an example for citing work from a book. Below is an example from the book The Basics of Interpersonal Communication by Scott McLean. So for an essay about interpersonal relations, I might reference this book. Check out the example below. To improve your listening skills, there are a few things you can do. Be silent and take turns when speaking. Don't interrupt, and remember to make time for the people you care about. McLean, 43. Do you see how I included parentheses with the author's last name? And the page number where I read the information? This is an example of MLA citation. Once you have taken all of your notes and read through your information, it's time to start writing your first draft. Before you begin typing, review your essay writing process. Remember the brief form from a few slides ago with your thesis and 3 supporting paragraphs? Well, the next outline you'll create goes into more detail. A model outline to use has your thesis written at the top of the page. Then each of your main paragraphs is broken down, with information jotted down for each paragraph. So you have an idea of what to write once you've selected the main ideas for each of your supporting paragraphs. Your textbook provides some great examples of outlines, so make sure to check them out before you begin to write your own outline. You're already familiar with the traditional format of an essay, but let me go over a few things with you. Your essay begins with your introduction, which contains your thesis. Depending on your paper, your introduction can be 1 to 2 paragraphs long. After your introduction, you'll have 3 supporting paragraphs that each demonstrate your thesis. Then you have your conclusion. Get to know this formula. You'll be using it often throughout your college career. You probably won't write your bibliography until you've completed the final draft of your paper, but no matter what, you need to be aware of how to properly format one. A bibliography, alternately called a works cited page, depending on the format you're using, is an alphabetized list of the materials you use to write your research paper. Bibliographies include the name of the author, the title of the published work, the location and name of the publisher, and the year the material was published. The format you will use for a bibliography varies depending on the type of material you are citing. You cite books, newspapers, and websites differently, so remember to keep track of all the resources you use to help write your paper so you have everything you need when it comes time to write your bibliography. Your textbook provides several examples on how to do this, so make sure to reference it often when you're writing.